Okay, so what is the base data set?
The starting point of any reports that we're going to create, and it always has a downstream,
Okay,
and we can
so
import three
okay,
types of the source are like custom reports, SFTP and Excel files.
okay. So the base data set is primarily created uh, to basically import data into Workday. So we met on. Okay, so the whole purpose of creating a base data set is that it allows me to import data into the Workday tenant. Let me log in. So I'm proxying as Logan McNeil. We had created 3 base data sets. One to import the company structure, the other one to import the supervisory structure, and the third one was basically to import the worker details. Okay, so let's go to the data catalog. Okay, from here we would look at our data sets, and what was our tag? It was
WB Jan 7, yeah,
Feb7.
Feb 7.
Okay, so we have created 3 base data sets, right? All right, but
Yes.
we had 3 separate sources of data. One was the company details, one was the supervisory details, and the third one was the worker details. Now, corresponding to those 3 sources of data, what we have done is we have created 3 base data sets. Now, but then this, if you see, doesn't serve any purpose until I'm able to bring this data together, right? Because all this data is currently segregated in 3 different data sets, right? So for me to
Yes.
ultimately understand in a given company how many organizations are there, in a given organization, for example, how many workers are there, the attributes of those workers, and so on and so forth, what I'll have to do is I'll have to create a derived data set. So what is a derived data set? A derived data set is primarily created for bringing in data from multiple data sources. It is created for your data transformation. Now, you can also do some bit of data transformation in base data sets. So if I view a new tab, one of these base data sets, we know that or we just mentioned that all data transformations happens in the stages. So stages is what transform your data. So stages model the flow of data, or they basically transform the data. So in that sense, if you see, even in a base data set, we have the ability to add certain stages. In fact, that Parse stage is something Workday automatically added. But then, in addition to that as well, we can add a few additional stages. So in that sense, even in base data set, some kind of transformation can be done. But the actual transformations can only happen in a derived data set, because only in a derived data set you can bring together data from multiple sources. And how do you bring together data from multiple sources? Right? Through data which is read in your base data set. So if you see
Yep.
here, I have the ability to add some stages, and we'll look at those. Okay, but the actual transformation, it happens in a derived data set. So let's go back to the data catalog, and here I am going to create my first derived data set. Okay, so derived data set. What is a derived data set? A derived data set is based on one or more existing tables or data sets. So tables, we'll talk about that later, right? But for now, a derived data set is basically created using one or more existing tables or data sets. These data sets could be base data sets or it could be other derived data sets. All right. Okay. Now, so the source data of a derived data set comes from the output of existing tables or data sets, right? So when we create a base data set gets a pipeline. Workday automatically adds a default stage into that pipeline, which is the Parse stage. We may add any extra stages as well. Data enters the base data set, goes through this transformation in different stages, and finally comes out of the base data set. Now the output of this base data set would become the source of data or the input of the derived data set, which is consuming that data set. Okay, now what
Okay.
is the purpose of this? You basically create or you use derived data sets to blend data together from different sources, both Workday and non-Workday. So it is actually here that you're bringing in data which is from Workday, which is non-Workday, multiple sources, and so on and so forth. Right? Now, how do we create a derived data set? The task for creating a derived data set is, if I come in here, create and derived data set.
Okay, so we no need to click on any existing BDS, right? We can directly go to
Yes.
create.
So once we select it, then system would ask you for BDS.
Okay.
You
So
directly go
first
to
time
create.
when
Mhm.
uh, okay, first time when we created, it was in orange color. So now it has changed to blue, or is just the Workday interface?
Where, which, oh,
The
this one.
create button. Yeah, yeah, the
Okay,
create.
yeah. So, so here there are a couple of things. I'm not sure if this is, let me show you. Tenant branding. So I'm not sure even this is controlled. Yeah, this is also controlled by tenant branding. So there's this
Mm-hmm.
task which is called configure tenant branding. Here the color is, you see,
Okay, got it.
instructive. Let me select this, or maybe
Uh, I thought, I mean, it got changed, since we created BDS or something like that.
no. So now when I log out and log back in again, let's log out actually. Oh, it's still yellow here. Okay, I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
you don't have the ability to change individually. It still
Oh,
must
okay,
have
okay.
come somewhere. Okay, any which ways. So create and create a derived data set. Right? Now, when you create a derived data set, that's when system would ask you which of the base data sets you want to use to create a derived data set. We saw that the moment we created our base data set, Workday automatically added the primary pipeline. right? So
Yep.
Workday automatically added the primary pipeline. Here I have mentioned that a derived data set can consist of multiple tables or data sets. So the moment you select the first base data set, if you see, when I'm creating this derived data set, the first table, the first base data set, or the first derived data set that I select, that becomes the primary pipeline for this derived data set that I'm creating. Okay. So what is the
Okay.
primary
So we'll have to
pipeline? The
choose it
primary,
carefully.
right, exactly. So the primary pipeline is simply the primary source of data, but it can get data from multiple sources. Okay, so in that case, let me ask you this. Which of these, so if you see, I have the company structure. Within company, I have supervisory details, and within supervisory, I have the worker details. So which one do you think should be my primary pipeline?
It should be company details.
Yeah, so it should be company details, because ultimately what I need is, for this company, I want to extract all the data,
The
right?
supervisory organ worker details.
Right, and worker
Yep.
details. So the pipeline you choose. So now I'm coming here, creating a derived data set. I'm searching for it, and this becomes my primary pipeline. So the moment I select it, system would ask me for a name, and I'm calling it WB September 7th. This is my TDS 01. I'm creating it. I'm just calling it. This is my level 1, and this has my company details. So I'm just calling it company details. Okay, tags, I would link it to the tag that I created earlier. I can give some description if I want to. And okay, now this is all I need to do. The moment I do that, system would create my derived data set. Now this derived data set would basically have all the data which is coming from the base data set. What is that base data set? Basically the company details. So if I click on edit, if you see here, Workday has automatically added the primary pipeline, right? But more importantly, so just like we saw with our base data set, here as well, Workday has added the primary pipeline. But the difference is here,
When we create a base data set, we'll get the parse stage, and when we create a derived data set, our primary pipeline would be import.
the first stage of the primary pipeline is import, right?
Import, yeah,
Here,
got it.
right here, the first stage. Let me go back to the data catalog. So in a base data set, the first stage is basically, so if I take this as my base data set and view it in new tab. So here, one more thing, if you see now this base data set is imported by this derived data set, right? Because from this
Yeah.
base data set, we are creating this derived data set. So this base data set is imported by this derived data set. Okay, now let's look at this base data set. Now here again, system has added the primary pipeline. System has added a stage within that primary pipeline, and as you mentioned, that stage is the parse stage, whereas here that stage is the import stage. But you'll also see another difference, and that is, let's this load. Okay, so here what you said is right. We have the primary pipeline, within that we have the parse stage. Here we have the primary pipeline within the import stage. But the second difference is here, if you see, there's no change pipeline option, whereas here there's an option to change pipeline. Now what does it convey,
Yes.
right? We have already mentioned that a base data set can only have one pipeline, which is basically its primary pipeline. Because a derived data set can have multiple pipelines, which is in addition to the primary pipeline, it is just asking me which other pipeline do you want to see. Though at this point in time, there's no other pipeline. So when I click here, it only shows me that there is one pipeline. If I want, I can add a new pipeline as well, right? Whereas on a base data set, I don't have that option. The second thing, so the output, so the part stage is the output of the primary pipeline. The output of the primary pipeline is the output of the entire data set. And the output of this data set, if you see, is the import or the input of this data set. So the
Data set, yeah.
data that I have here has been imported in here. And if I go in here now and click on view lineage, I'll see a lineage has been created. What is that lineage? That this
So,
data set is being imported into this data set,
so there's a downstream trend
right?
from
From
BDS to
here,
DDS.
so
Okay.
from BD for this BDS, this is the downstream uh, dependency. For this DDS, this BDS is the upstream dependency. So there's
Yeah.
a two-way dependency, right? Okay, so now let's go ahead and look at the import and the parse stage in a bit more detail. Okay, we already know some of these aspects. So when a data set is created, Workday automatically creates a primary pipeline. Afterwards, any number of additional pipelines can be added by importing other tables and data sets, right? We also know that a pipeline is a collection of stages and can be added to both base and derived data sets. However, some pipelines can, some stages can only be added to derived data set. So if we go into the tenant now and look at this derived data set, when I click on stage, you'll see this list of stages that I can add is many more. Whereas on this data set, I can only add certain stages. So though we can
Yes.
add stages in both base and derived data sets, some stages are only applicable on derived data set. Okay, now let's talk about the parse stage. Okay, so the first one is the import stage. So Workday automatically adds import stage, right, as the first stage of every derived data set, right? This stage cannot be deleted. We'll see later as we add more stages that other stages can be deleted if you have added them. But an import stage or a parse stage cannot be deleted. So Workday adds an import stage for every derived dataset because it is simply importing data from other datasets or other tables. Okay, so if I go back, you see that I do not have an ability to either delete a parse stage or delete an import stage. Okay, so before I talk about Parse stage, let me first add a new stage to this pipeline. And this stage I'm adding, if you see, I have three base data sets and I have data in three separate data sets. Now my requirement is to bring that data together. And how am I going to do that? Through this derived data set. So I'm adding a new stage, and the stage I'm adding is a join. So what is a join stage? A join stage is basically added to join data from multiple data sets or tables, right? So join stage basically joins or appends columns from different tables. So in my table one or data set one, whatever you want to call it. So let's take a random example. I have in table one, so this is my table one. It has, let's say, worker name, worker date of birth, or let's say I have worker's ID, worker's name, and I have date of birth. Okay, so for first employee, the ID is, let's say, E01, then I have E02 and E03. So table one is my employee master. Okay, so the name of employee E01 is employee 1. Then we have employee 2, right? First name and last name. Let's say this person's name is EMP3. And this person's date of birth is some 1990, some 1992, and 1985. Okay, so this is my table 1, which is basically employee master. And now I have another table, which is my table 2, which is, let's say, asset master. Okay, here I have the asset ID, the asset name, right? And the employee to whom the asset is assigned, or the employee to whom it is tagged. I'll just say EMP tag. So my first asset ID is, let's say, A01, and then I have A02, and then A03. My asset 1 is, let's say, a laptop, and this asset is assigned to, let's assume, E01, right? So this asset A01 has been allocated to my employee E01. All right. Similarly, I have asset 02, which is, let's assume, uh, 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 keyboard, right, or a headset. This is also allocated to E01. Okay, then again I have A01 asset, which is, again, we know, a laptop, allocated to E02. Okay, and then I have asset A03, which is some server, and it is not allocated to anyone, it is assigned to some admin, right, which is a shared asset. So now I have data in two tables. What I need is to get, so this is my requirement. So for each worker, I want to understand the assets that are assigned to those workers. So in a single table, I want to get the worker name, the worker ID, the worker name, the worker date of birth, and the assets that are assigned to them. Okay, so which means I have to create a single table, which is a combination of these two tables. And how do I create a single table which has cells from multiple tables or columns from multiple tables? I do that by adding a join stage. So a join allows me to join columns from multiple tables. Okay. Now when I do a join, I can do different types of joins. Okay. So now if you see, I have a single pipeline, which is my primary pipeline, and this is the data in that primary pipeline. I need to join it. So when I need to join it, I need the second table as well, right? Only then I'll be able to join. I can only join two things. So when I select join, then system asks me for the secondary pipeline. So as part of, instead of me having to add a secondary pipeline manually, what I can do is on my primary pipeline, I can add a join stage. When I do that, system would ask me, obviously, what is the other pipeline that you want to join with your primary pipeline? And now I can search and select. So here I gave you this example, but in our case, we have to join company details with supervisory details. So this is my second pipeline or my second table that I want to join. So I'm selecting that here. So I'm saying add another pipeline and I'm selecting this base data set. This is the one and select. All right. So if you see now, I'm joining data from my primary pipeline with data from my secondary pipeline. So this has done two things. It has automatically created a secondary pipeline for me. So this is my primary pipeline and this is my secondary pipeline. Okay. Okay. Now, if we come back here, so how do you think I'll be able to join these two tables? How would I identify which employee has which asset in this table?
So in this case, we'll get E1, 2, 3. There would be duplicate rows for 1.
Okay, no. So for first, how are you checking that employee one has which asset assigned to him? How are you identifying
But
that?
I with ID as our primary key.
All right. So we are using a primary key, right?
Mhm.
Now the same thing I have
Yes.
to do here as well. So I have to here we are saying E1 here matches E1 here, or this column here matches this column here, and this two is my primary key with which I'm able to link these two tables. So the same thing when I'm adding or joining two tables or two pipelines as we call them in Prism, it is asking me from which field in primary pipeline links to which field in secondary pipeline. Okay, so let's quickly check these pipelines. So here I have company name, company ID, sector, uh, parent company ID, and then we have WPA load ID and stamp. Okay, this is what I have in primary pipeline, and this is what I have in secondary pipeline. So which field do you think is a match? I have organization name, type, supervisory organization workday ID, org level from top, sector BU, and headcount fields. So which field
I saw
can,
sector as the, yeah.
Mhm. Okay, so this is
Sector is
why,
common in both the.
right. So this is why we initially selected or created this common value, right? So if you see these companies, they belong to this sector, and these organizations, they belong to that very sector. So we would use this sector as the common field. So now I'm saying in my primary pipeline, map sector with the sector in my secondary pipeline. The moment I do that, Workday has shown me the join result. In join result, it is only showing me those matching values. So it is simply taking sector from my table 1 and sector from table 2. Okay, now the second thing it asks me is the type of join. So the type of join that happens determines what is my output table. So let's first see. I have the employee ID, which is my final table. I have employee name. I have employee date of birth. I'll have asset ID. I'll have asset name. I'll have asset name and asset tag. So this is how my final table would look like. Okay, so now ID here or ID here maps to this here, and it also maps to this here, right? Because this ID maps to these two. These are
Yes.
common values. So I'll simply copy them and paste them here. Right? So this is how a single row from here maps to two rows from here. Okay, similarly, I have E02 mapping to this here. Okay, so these are common values. These, but what about this? So this
Okay.
doesn't have any match, and
Yep.
this doesn't have any match.
Yeah. So if it's a left out, I mean, if the type is left outer join, that means it will still consider E03, but will get null values, right?
Right. So if the type is left outer join, so what I'm saying is get all data from my left pipeline and then map it to all data from the right pipeline. Wherever there is a
Yes.
map, data would be found. Wherever there is no map, I'll simply get null. All right. Okay. So what other types of joins are there?
Left, right, and inner join, I guess. I'm not sure.
Okay. So what would the right
Inner
outer
join,
join give
outer
me?
join.
So this is
Right
left
will give
outer
me
join.
right will give me only E1, E2, and admin. It won't give me E3.
So this is a left outer join. Okay. What would right outer give me?
Right will give me E1, E2, and admin.
E1, E2, admin. But do we have admin here?
No, so it will give us null, right?
Okay. So it will give me null here and here.
Mhm. A03 server and admin.
Okay.
And then we have, I guess, inner join,
Mm-hmm.
which will give us the combination, I mean, unique values. Like it will give us only E1 and E2. It won't pull E03 and admin,
So inner join would only give me that data which
which is
has
available
a
in both the data
combination, right?
tables.
So it only gives me combination. So inner join will not give me this row at all. And what is outer join?
Yes.
Full outer join?
Com Combination of everything is 0, 1, 2, 3, and admin.
So it is also known as full outer join or simply outer join. So that will give me this as well as this. All right. So it basically the type of join that I do determines what kind of data is returned. Okay. All right. That is perfect. So here I want to, the default join type is left outer join, which means system would check the matching values from left table and then map it to the mapping values from right table. Wherever there is no mapping value in the right table, it simply gets null. Okay, the next thing that I'll have to select which fields from primary pipeline should be included and which fields from the secondary pipeline should be included. Okay, so now by default what we have done is we have included all fields from primary pipeline, all fields from or all columns from secondary pipeline. But do you think we could have avoided some of these or any one of these columns?
No, I mean, it depends on a requirement, right? I mean, in this case, we can consider all the columns.
right? Or yeah, so in this case we can probably consider all the columns because we have admin which is unique here, but most probably I could have avoided this, right? Because employee one and these IDs are actually mapping these values.
Okay.
So especially in left outer join, we can avoid the one of these columns, right? Because if you see, it has exactly the same data as it's here, right? This is simply a
Mhm.
duplicate. Or if I come here, if you see the sector here, which is what is joining to sector in my secondary table, and they are exact duplicates, right? Except for where there is no value at all. But that is fine. Even in that case, I can completely remove this column because it will only give me null wherever there is not a match. So now here, any which ways, I would select which fields from my primary pipeline will be available, and I'm selecting all the fields will be available. So now it adds all the fields from my primary pipeline, and then I can click here and say which fields from my secondary pipeline will be available. Now here I don't need sector because sector is something which is any which way is coming from the primary pipeline. That is the matching key. Only because it is matching, it is giving me unique value. I'll remove
So
sector B. Mhm.
in this case, we are using left outer join. So anything which is available only in our primary pipeline would be available, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So here A03 is not coming. Right. Okay. Now for that, in order to handle that, what I've done is, and that's why if you see in my supervisory structure, I have actually created two types of sector fields. One is sector and the second one is sector underscore BU. All right. So what I've done is, let me go ahead and save it. So when you create a supervisory org or any organization in Workday, you associate with that a subtype, and that is the property that I have basically used. So every organization in Workday, as I mentioned earlier, has a subtype. So for these companies, these are the subtypes. Similarly, for these supervisory orgs, I checked their subtype and simply got that subtype, and that's what I'm calling a sector, right? So that is one property that I've used to join data. Okay, but the problem with that is, let this load and then I'll show you. So in which case, while that loads, if you see now when I click on change pipeline, I have a secondary pipeline as well. So this is my second. If I click here, so this secondary pipeline or this additional pipeline again automatically has an import stage. So even though we simply joined it, Workday automatically created the additional pipeline, imported the data from supervisory structure, and then did a join. And that join is only available if I go here on my primary pipeline, right? So whenever I click on any stage, system shows me the output of that stage. When I click on output, import, if you see the output of import stage is basically what it imported from the company details, the base data set, and it has 7 rows of data. However, when I click on join, if you see now, when I click on here, it is showing me the output of the join stage, which is basically a combination that I've done or the joining that I've done between the primary pipeline and additional data set. Okay. So whenever we click on any stage, system shows me the output of that stage or the final output of that stage. Makes sense?
Yes.
Okay. So let's look at the supervisory structure once again. Now the problem I had was every organization. So when we create a supervisory org, we create a hierarchy of supervisory orgs. Let me show that. If I go to global modern services, okay. Because the global modern services is a supervisory org, which is at the top. So if I go to org chart and here under global modern services, this is the subtype company. So in here, in this first column, I'm basically getting the subtype of that particular organization. So for information and technology, the subtype is IT, which I can see in the details. So similarly for sales and marketing, the subtype is energy. Okay, now let's go to the org chart. So if I go to the additional actions, so this is again, this nothing right or wrong. This is the approach that I have used to handle the data. Okay. Okay, now under GMS, if you see, I have executive management group, altitude corporation, which are all at level 2. So altitude corporation, company Z, executive management group, HANA Cloud 1, these are all level 2. And these are the subtypes of these organizations. Now under level 2, I have my level 3. So if I go ahead and expand executive management group, under it, if you see level 3, I have global talent, human resources, information technology, so IT, uh, human resources, finance and administration, information technology, operations, so on and so forth. Okay, so here I have basically received or extracted the subtype associated with the organization. But from level 4, what I've done is risk and management. So if I open this organization, so risk and management, here it shows the subtype is division and sector underscore BU is life sciences. So where is life sciences? Life sciences is, where is life sciences? Finance and administration.
Yep.
So let me expand finance and administration. Where is finance and administration? Here. So under finance and administration, we have risk management, right? So basically what I'm trying to do is which business unit these organizations belong to. So if I open risk and management, if you see, let me open it. So for risk and management, once again, if I come down here, its own subtype is division. So if I come to details, its own subtype is division, but it is part of which business unit? It is part of finance and administration. And the subtype of finance and administration is life sciences. And the reason I had to do that, because ultimately, if you see this join that I have received, I have only received for the first 3 levels, wherein the sector actually matches the sector of the company. But what about all these subordinates that also have to map, right? So this is actually a department in my IT sector, right? Similarly, this is a group in my energy sector. What is my energy sector? My energy sector is EMEA. Make sense? So that is why I had to create 2 different columns. One was sector, and for lower level from 4, 5, 6, 7, all these subordinates, I'm also extracting the sector of the business unit that these organizations belong to. I had to create this separate column altogether. Okay. So now what I've done is, and there was also a reason I wanted to show you the union stage as well. So that's why I added 2 columns. Ideally, what I could have done is I could have directly updated the subtype of each of these organizations. But then that way I would not have been able to show you the union stage. But any which ways, now this is my derived data set, right? This data set, derived data set, has 2 pipelines feeding into it, and this is the final output. So whenever you add a stage, the stage may change the number of columns as well as rows. So if you see here in my import stage, there were 7 columns of data and 7 rows of data. But after my join stage, my columns have changed to 60 and my rows have changed to 9. So adding any stage may change the number of columns as well as rows of data. So
But that
stages,
depends on us, right?
the type of stage you have,
Yeah.
right? So that depends on the type of stage. That also depends on the data that is available, right? But yes, it may change, and that's what we are saying. It's not like it will change always. Okay. All right. So now I have created a derived data set wherein I have joined the company details with the supervisory details. But this has not given me all the supervisory organizations. This has only given me a partial view of my supervisory organizations. What I need is the other supervisory orgs as well. So for that, I'm going to create one more derived data set. So I'm going back here. I'm creating one more derived data set. Let me copy this. Derived data set. This derived data set, I want to again build it from WB Feb 7th. Again, I am selecting company details as my primary pipeline. Select. I want to call it DDS02. Link it to the WB September 7th and save this. Okay, let's go to edit. Workday has added the import stage. Now I already have the join between the company and the supervisory organizations based on this sector, which is up to level 3. What I need is also to identify which company and which of these subordinate levels are mapped. So for that, I'm adding once again a join stage. Again, I have to select another pipeline, and the pipeline that I select is once again supervisory organizations. To WB Feb 7th supervisory organizations and select. Once again, system would ask me which primary pipeline. So my primary pipeline field remains the same, sector, but this time I want to map it not directly with sector, but sector underscore BU. So this is where I'm mapping it. Earlier I had mapped it with sector. And I want to select all the fields from my primary pipeline, from my secondary pipeline. I do not want to select all the fields. I want to select sect, right? Because this is something which is already coming in, and I'll say done. So now if you see, I have all of my data mapped, but in two different derived data sets. In DDS01, I have these companies mapped to these supervisory organizations, and in DDS02, again I have the companies, but this time they are mapped to all these subordinate supervisory organizations, which are at level 4 and 5 and 6 and 7. So here the number of rows are much more. Here I only got some 7 or 8 rows. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Now if you see, I have data. Now I have managed to join my data, but that data is segregated across two different derived data sets. So I have DDS01, which has the mapping of companies with the supervisory orgs in the first 3 levels. And then I have DDS02, which has the mapping of companies in the supervisory org in the subordinate levels, level 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and so on and so forth. So earlier I had combined columns from two different tables. Now I have table 1, let's assume this is the table 1, and I have table 2 which has, let's assume, data for a different set of employees but same data. So this is my table 2 which has data for E04 and let's say E05, and let's assume E05 and E06. I'm just taking some random values. Let's not consider this. We don't need this anymore. So now I have data in two different data sets. One is data set 1, which has some column or some rows of data. One is derived data set 02, which has other rows. What I need is to create a single table, basically by joining all this data together. So this is what I ultimately need. So how do I do that? By creating a union stage. So union allows me to, as the name suggests, it allows me to add rows from one table to rows from another table, right? Whereas join, it primarily deals with joining columns of one table with columns of other table. In the process of doing this join, there may be additional rows that are added. Okay. So now I have to create my third derived data sets, and that is, I'm going back to the data catalog. I have to create my derived data set number 3. I want to take this as the primary pipeline. Select it. I would simply call it DDS03. This derived data set is based on another derived data set which is at level 2. So I'm simply calling it 02, and WB Feb 7th is the tag. Save this and edit. So this DDS03 has the same data as DDS01 now, because this DDS03, so I have DDS01 here. So this DDS01 has been imported into this DDS03. Or I actually didn't have to do that. I could have directly unioned. Okay, this is actually not required.
Okay, a
I
union can be similar to the full outer join, right?
no. See again, the idea of a full outer join. Okay, so this is a full outer join, right? Wherein I'm basically joining columns of table 1 to columns of table 2, right? Here the columns could be different. So here I have column as ID, employee name, and employee date of birth. Whereas here the columns are asset ID, asset name, and employee tag. So in join, my columns are different. System simply adds or combines those columns together. Whereas in a join, my columns in table 1 would be joined with columns in table 2. So, or sorry, whereas in union, system checks what are the matching columns and simply joins data or adds data from column 1 to column 2, or table in column 1 to table in column 2. Okay, so in join, my columns could be different, because here system is only considering this primary key and trying to do the mapping. Whereas here there need not be any mapping. Here if you see, there's no match between E1, E and here. The second thing, the number of columns as such wouldn't go up, unless
Yep.
of course there is some random column which doesn't exist here, which exists here, maybe some DEF column. System simply adds this column here. So system would not go ahead and increase the number of columns, right? So union is simply adding data from table A to adding data from table B. There need not be any primary key. Nothing is required. Okay, I'm just thinking, did we need to create this DDS03 or I could have, okay, I think this was not required actually. Let me go back to the data catalog and for now, let me delete this DDS03. So how can you delete something? You directly click here, and if there is no dependency, system would allow you to delete it. I'm deleting DDS03 for now. Okay, anyways, the reason I've deleted it is because using DDS01 and DDS02 itself, I can do a union. So now I have some data in DDS01, some data in DDS02. I want to add that data together. And how do I do that? By doing a union. So I'll click here, click on a union stage. Again, system would ask me which is the second pipeline I want to use. So the second pipeline I want to use is basically this one. Is this not saved yet? Uh, DDS02, sorry, DDS01, which has my company details. Let's view it in new tab. This is also saved. If it doesn't work, then we'll add a new derived data set. So let me try one more time. I'm not sure why system doesn't directly allow me to select it here, but any which ways. Okay, I'm clicking on edit. I want to add a new union stage. I want to select another pipeline, and the pipeline I want to select is DDS02. Okay, now it allows me to select. Okay, so F7, DDS02, company details, select it. Now this is the difference once again. Here when I'm doing a union, if you see system is simply checking which column in primary pipeline matches to which column in the secondary pipeline. And how is this mapping being done? Not based on the field value. This mapping is simply being done based on the title of the column name. So here if you see system checks the company name is a column in primary pipeline which maps to company name in column in union, and simply company workday ID sector. So here there's a perfect match. So these are my two pipelines, and this is the output, which basically has the same columns as my. Make sense?
Yes.
Right here, if I want, workday automatically identifies, and how is it doing that? Based on the title of the column. So it checks that column name In primary pipeline maps, there is similarly a column name in secondary pipeline as well, and Workday automatically proposes a name for the combined field. Similarly, it says, okay, this column maps to this column. How is Workday doing that? Simply by looking at the name of the column. If I find that this mapping that Workday has identified is not correct, then I can come here and select a different value. Okay, but based on the name of the column, system automatically identifies that this column should map to this column in a given pipeline. In a join, it was basically the value of that column. Okay, and if I want, I can change the name of my union column, but that is fine. I don't need to do that. I'll simply say done. So now if you see, this gives me the combined output. So this has the full list of data in a single data set. Let's go ahead and save this, and we'll also look at the lineage now. So let's look at the lineage and see what we have done till now. Okay, not the lineage of DDS02. I need to look the lineage of DDS01. So view lineage. Okay. So if you see, what did we do? We took BDS01, we took BDS02, and we joined them in DDS01. Right? Similarly, we take BDS01, we took BDS02, and both of them again we joined in DDS02. And then we took this DDS02 and then unioned it into DDS01. So DDS01 has three upstream dependencies. First, it is joining data from company details and supervisory details, and then unioning it with the DDS01. So that is why I see this dependency. Make sense?
Yep.
Okay, so let's quickly write that down. So join stage. The join stage specifies basically which rows from each data set pipeline to include in the join result. It joins or clubs or adds columns from two tables or pipelines based on the mapped values. Okay, I'll not go in details of the others because you already know them. So we have inner join, you already knew what is join.
Yeah, I already knew. I have an IT background, so I'm aware of these types of joins,
Okay,
but I have not implemented anywhere in Workday Prism. So
okay. So this is actually, again, you mentioned it right. This is not a concept which is unique to Workday. They have obviously taken it from Oracle, right? But the only difference is in Oracle, if you had to do the same thing, you had to write an SQL statement, right? Select
Mhm.
start from this and then join it with this and so on and so forth. So
Yes.
Workday has made it much simpler. It's basically a user interface. Okay. Uh, then we have the union stage. Uh, okay. And the idea for a union stage is that you can include two data sets or two data sets or pipelines, whatever you want to call it, in a union stage to combine data from both those pipelines. Okay, now when I click back, if I click here, you will see every other stage. So this is what I mentioned, every other stage can be deleted, but your import stage and parse stage cannot be deleted, right?
Yep.
Because these stages is something you manually added. Okay, again, if I want to make any changes, I can click here. Okay, so if I have basically, let's assume I said, okay, this was not the right one, and I made some changes instead of this. Maybe I selected this and did some changes. And then finally I decide, okay, no, I want to use the Workday default mapping, which Workday proposed. I can click on rematch. When I do that, Workday would basically discard all the changes that I have done, and it will basically rematch the way it did when we initially created that join. So whatever changes I did, maybe I made 10 changes and I don't remember what. I simply want to use the default setting that Workday has done when we initially created the join, basically start from scratch. I can click on rematch. So if you see, it says any user specific mappings will be lost. So if I've done
Okay.
any mappings, they would all be mapped. So it will take me back to the default.
Is it kind of similar to the reset button or
Yeah, that
like?
kind of reset
Okay.
button. Okay, if I click on clear all, it will basically discard all the field mappings that have been done. And then I can go ahead and do those mappings uh, myself. Right? If I say include all, it will include all the fields from column A, and then I can manually do any mapping for myself. But any which ways, these are not used. Rematch is something you use very often, right? And then clear all as well.
Yep.
Okay, so we have a rematch. Basically, click this button if you want to discard all field mappings and return to the default field mappings that Workday detects and configures. That is a rematch. Then we have clear all. Click this button to discard all field mappings altogether, right? Then define at least, because the whole purpose of union is at least one field should be mapped, right? Then you should define at least one field mapping in the union stage before saving it. So if I simply say clear all, Workday would clear everything, right? And then if it is giving me an error because at least one field has to be mapped,
Yes.
right? And I say remap, Workday maps everything. Okay, in which case I'm not going to save it. So let's scroll down and cancel all the changes we have done. Workday had already done the mapping for us. Okay, so now I have data from, I have managed to join data from the company details and map it to the data from the supervisory details. But if you see, we have not yet considered the third base data set that we created,
Yes.
right? And the third base data set was basically worker details. So now with this, with me having the company and supervisory details added, I can now again join it to the worker details, right? So before I do that, let's go back to the data catalog and see what is happening with our worker details. So this is where we have worker details. And what was the so now what would I do? What do I need to do? So here I have the final all supervisory and company details, and I need to map it to the worker details. So which stage would I add this time?
Again, join.
Okay. And what is my primary key? So let's open the two data sets and quickly
Mhm.
see what should be the primary key based on which we have to do that join. Okay, so let's click here. All right, so I have worker name, the worker ID, the worker type, supervisory org name, supervisory org ID, gender, and so on and so forth. Here I have company name, the sector, then parent company ID, and we have supervisory org name, supervisory organization.
We can take a
Over here.
supervisory org name.
All right. Okay, so here uh, the mapping key is the given worker belongs to a given supervisory organization, and that supervisory organization obviously has a unique ID. I can map the name of the organization. Name is not actually a complete mapping because multiple organizations may have the same name.
Yes.
So I'll do a mapping with the name as well as ID. So now I can
Okay.
come back to my derived data set and add one more join stage.
We are doing this all in BSD1, right? 01.
In DDS01 derived data.
Okay.
Let me go back, cancel. So if you look at the lineage, again, I joined BDS01 to BDS02 with our DDS01, and then I unioned my DDS01 with DDS02, which was again a join of BDS01 and BDS02. So now in DDS01, I have the final company and supervisory details. And this DDS01, again, I want to join it with my worker details. So I'm doing it all in DDS01. Okay, that is why you're looking at this lineage. Now, this is still simple, wherein I have a few data sets. But when you work in projects, this might become very complex. So having this lineage open gives you that view of what needs to be done, right, or where we are. Okay, so the reason I'm doing it in DDS01 is because it has my final data, my company details as well as the supervisory details. Okay, I'm clicking on add stage. I want to do a new join. Okay. So it still shows me BDS01. If you see, it is showing me BDS01 as the primary pipeline of DDS01. So maybe that's why you are confused. So when we created DDS01, we selected BDS01 company details as the primary pipeline. So now when I'm doing a new join, if you see, I would still be joining it with the primary pipeline, right? So I took that primary pipeline and joined it with this secondary pipeline. And the output of that, again, I unioned it with this DDS02. So whenever I add any stage, system always shows me the primary pipeline because you do all those joins, unions with respect to your primary pipeline, right? And that is why we discussed that the output of the primary pipeline is always the output of the derived data set. So all these joins, unions, whatever you're doing it with respect to your primary pipeline. Makes sense?
Yes.
Okay. So now I can come here, take my worker details, search for it. Here it is. Select it. Okay. I want to map the supervisory org name with the supervisory org name here. But also because name can be duplicate, I'm adding an and saying also
Yes. ID.
the ID. I could have simply done this on the ID itself because ID would always be unique, right? Again, from my primary pipeline, I want to select all the fields. From my secondary pipeline, I want to select all the fields except for supervisory org name and ID because that is any which is coming from the primary pipeline. And say done. And if I save this, now if you see, this has 32 fields or rows or columns. Earlier it had 16 columns. If I refresh my lineage, data set, let's view the lineage once again. Is this not saved yet? Okay, now I'm going to save it. Okay, it's saved now. Let's go in here. It should get, okay, and which ways? Let me view the lineage from here. From there, it's not showing. Okay, so now if you see, this is actually importing data from 4 different sources. BDS01, BDS02, BDS01 was the primary pipeline. It was joined with BDS02, unioned with DDS02, and then finally again joined with BDS03. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so till now we have managed to basically get data joined from all the 3 sources, right? But all these 3 sources are just coming from Workday, right? So these were 3 custom reports that we had created. Obviously, when we are saying custom reports, these were all based on Workday data, and we simply imported those custom reports, and then we have joined and unioned and other kind of transformations. So we have a single data source now, right, which has all the 3 data which is coming from Workday. But then that is not obviously the full capabilities of Workday. Workday also allows you to get data from outside Workday and then add that data to data which is coming from Workday or which is coming from other non-Workday sources. If you remember last time, I mentioned that we would also be getting data from outside Workday. And for that, I have created a sample file. Now, this would not make much sense now because obviously this is a comma separated file and there's lots of numbers. But the idea is I would be importing this data into Workday. Okay, so here,
Okay.
if I just look at the column, I have worker, the employee ID, I have something called grant, and so on and so forth. So the idea behind this file is this file includes the stock grants of the employees, right? So basically the stocks that are assigned to the workers and how much of that stock is already granted or vested and how much is remaining. So in Workday, in advanced compensation, the management of stocks or shares, that capability Workday doesn't offer. So even though in Workday you can see what kind of stocks were granted to the employees as part of the advanced compensation review or the merit review or the appraisal cycle, you would not be able to see how many employees have actually vested, how many are pending, and so on and so forth. So that data I want to import from outside Workday. Now you can import data from outside Workday. We already discussed using two sources. Either you can import data from a file, a plain CSV file, or a tab separated file, or any other file, or you can also import it from SFTP. Now SFTP has a similar format, it's just that it's a separate server. We'll also see the SFTP, but we do not have the SFTP connection, so we'll not be able to actually import any file, right? But this is very similar or exactly similar to how we import data from a file. Okay, so first let's look at getting data. So create a data set. So earlier when we created our base data set, we created our base data set from custom reports. So we created our base data set from a custom report. This time I'm creating my base data set from external
File.
data. And
Yep.
within external data, what you said is right. We have two options. For now, my external data source is simply a file. Ultimately, even if I select SFTP there as well, my source is a file that has been placed on an SFTP server. Okay. So the idea is you can create a data set using external data by uploading a file. Now the question is, even with SFTP, ultimately you'll be importing a file or uploading a file. So when do you use a file from your local machine versus when do you create a data set from SFTP? So the idea is usually when some data which is less likely to change over time. So maybe your company structure, let's assume, or let's say your stock grant details. Now stock over a long period of time, right? Once you have granted your stocks for the whole year, that stock grant details wouldn't change. Or basically any other aspect which doesn't change very frequently, that is what you would usually import through a file, right? Now again, there's no hard and fast rule for this. The only difference is when you get some external data from SFTP, you can schedule a integration which will automatically run and read that data. Because when you specify an SFTP, you're saying this data set, let's say data set ABC, it is importing data from file location, some SFTP location, let's say 10.108. Whatever. And the file that it would import is some EMP details file, EMP details dot CSV. So when you create this data set using an SFTP, you would specify that this data set would import data from this SFTP server, this directory, and these are the file details. So once that is done, your integration can automatically run, for example, on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis, whatever you specify, and automatically take the latest data or the latest updated data if a file has been placed. But from file, if you see, you're manually uploading it. So every time a new data comes, you'll have to manually upload it. So if some data changes every day, you'll have to keep uploading a new file every day. So that involves a manual activity, right? So this is usually used. So this method is usually used when the amount is data is not huge and the data itself doesn't change very often. So this is usually done.
No
Okay,
problem.
so this is usually done when data in the files is less likely to change over time, right? Okay, now the second thing is whenever you import data, so the maximum file size when you upload is 500 MB, right? So that's why I mentioned if the amount is data is huge or it is more likely to change over time, then you would not prefer a file method. Then the safety in terms of safety as well, and the best way is to go through an SFTP server. Okay, and the file should simply be a delimited file. So a delimited file, it could be any delimited. Usually it is comma delimited. That's what I have created. So a delimited file uh, in a plain text format, right? And it could be CSV or tab delimited. Okay, and then the file ideally should have one record per line, because system wouldn't be able to recognize if you have multiple records in a single line. Okay, so let's go into the system and create a new derived data set, a new base data set. So start proxy, open McNeil. Okay, so data catalog. I want to create a new base data set, but this time I want to do that from a file. Update classes. Okay, this is the file. I have already created a plain text file. Now, if you remember, the moment we would add any stage, specifically when we added it, whenever we created any derived data set, system automatically creates a primary pipeline, and within that primary pipeline, system automatically adds an import stage. Similarly, whenever we create any base data set, system automatically adds a parse stage. So whenever when you bring in data into data catalog using a base data set, and this data could be Workday data or again non-Workday data. Parse Workday automatically adds a parse stage as the first stage of the primary pipeline. So when you bring in data into data catalog using base data set, Workday automatically adds a parse stage. Okay, so let's go into the tenant now and have a see. So if you see earlier when I was importing data through a custom report, still Workday was adding a parse stage. But the difference was when I was importing data from a custom report, Workday was able to do this one-to-one mapping, wherein a column in a custom report maps to a column in my base data set. But here I'm not importing data from a custom report. I'm importing data from a file which exists outside Workday. So when I do that, you'll have to specify how you want to parse the data. Now, based on the format of the data, Workday automatically parses it, but you have the ability to change it. So if you see, this was my file, and this is what Workday has done. It has taken each of this and added it as a column. So if I come here, I have Logan McNeil. So Workday has automatically identified that this is a comma separated file. So each comma is considered as a new column. So we have 2101, which is my column 2, and then VP004, which is my column 3, and then Vice President, and so on and so forth. So if you see here, Workday has taken the field delimiter to be a comma, right? So the comma is considered to be a field delimiter here. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Now, Workday has automatically added rows as well. So how are those rows added? So basically any new line character, which is basically when you press enter, that is being considered as a new row of data. So here Workday has also identified row delimiter. The row delimiter is basically any new line character, which could be usually a line feed, a character feed, a carriage return, or so on and so forth. So when you basically select any new line, the moment system encounters any new line character, right? Basically an enter, carriage return, and so on and so forth, Workday adds a new row of data. So we have the row delimiter, which Workday has identified as any new line. Then we have the field delimiter that Workday has identified as comma. If this is not the correct identification, then we can go ahead and change it. Okay. Next, I have the names of the columns at the top. So when Workday has automatically checked for the field names or the column names, use values from the first row. So from the first row, Workday is identifying the column names or the field names. Okay. Now, if you want, you can ignore rows at the top. So for example, many a times at the top, you have some comments added. This file is this, and use this file in this manner. Some description, some comments could be added. So here you can specify if certain number of rows have to be ignored from the top,
Okay.
right? So whatever you specify here, system would ignore that many number of rows from the top, right? If you see the first two rows are ignored, so this row and this row, these two rows are now ignored, and Steve
Yes.
Morgan, because we have selected. Okay, the next thing. Now what happens is if you see I have selected comma as my field delimiter. Now many times what may happen is comma is also part of your data. Now this is not separate fields, this is a single field. Now in that case, I can also specify the quote character. So what we are saying is the quote character is double quote. So here this all needs to be in a single column. If I don't specify, right, this is not three different columns, then I would include it in a quote character. So what we are saying is anything which is included in a quote character, their system would ignore the field delimiter. So even though here we have the field delimiter of comma, Workday would not divide it into three columns: water, soda, and can. Instead, it will consider it as a single data. So anything which is included in quote character, whatever I specify here, the default quote character is also always double quote. So anything which is included in a quote character would be considered as a single column and included in a single column, not automatically divided into separate columns or separate rows. Make sense? Okay. Okay. Now, then we also have to specify the escape character. Now again, for our data, these two are not relevant because in our data, we don't have comma anywhere. So maybe if I use this as my, let's say, row delimiter, now if you see the moment system encounters this, system would take Patrick O as one row or one column, and Brian would automatically move to the next column. So the quote character here, I would then have included this as a quote character to let Workday know that this is not two different columns, this is in fact a single column. Make sense?
Yes. Got it.
Or let me do that. Patrick Logan McNeil test. Logan McNeil test. I have saved this. I am canceling this. Again, filter on my tags. Now let me create one more derived data set from file. Open. The moment I do that, if you see,
Yeah.
okay, again, this should not have been included if I don't do this. So if I don't add test, comma, then system would automatically consider this comma because the moment it encounters comma, comma is the role delimiter, test will be
Delimiter.
moved to
Yeah.
the second one. Okay, now what is this escape character? Now if you see, I have specified that this is my quote character. In the sense, anywhere you see a starting quote and ending quote, everything between those quotes is considered single point of data. But let's assume I have data in this sense. So my data is, uh, let's say, to get two for the price of one or 9.99 each. So this is my data. Now in this data, if you see, I have my quote character, which is part of data, right? Now if I include this, ideally, if you see, okay, so let's assume this is my data, some comments. Now this all is a single statement. Now what will I do? I would add it to a quote character. This. this, and this. But the problem is system sees that the code starts here and it ends here. And then there's a new code which starts here and ends here. So how would system distinguish that this is the code character versus this is the actual data? So for that, we'll have to specify the escape character. So what we are saying is if the code character is part of the data, then it has to be escaped. So here I'll have to basically escape it. So that Workday knows that this is actually not a code. This code is part of the data. And this is actual code character. Make sense?
Yes, and we are gonna do this in our file or
Yeah, in the file,
okay.
right? So in the file, you have to specify data in this format. And then system checks, okay, escape character is a backslash. The moment it encounters a backslash, it knows that this is part of the data. So your file has to be in the right format. Obviously, you don't do it. Whoever is providing that file. So creating a file is not part of our responsibility, right? So we just import the file, but this is how these have to be read. Make sense? So I have the row delimiter, I have the field delimiter, read the column names from the top. I have the code character, escape character, the number of rows to include.
Yep.
Again, field values may contain new lines. Ignore this. So what we are saying is your your field values, they may include any new line character as well. So if you select this, system takes a lot of time. So basically what you're saying is, so what is a new line? The moment system encounters a new line, it adds a new row. So if you see here, system encountered a new line and system added a new row in here. But when we are saying your field value itself may encounter a new line, now system checks. System is basically checking, okay, this new line character, should I start a new row from here or should I not start a new row here? So we are basically saying field values can contain new lines. But again, this is never selected because when you select this and if the amount of data is huge, then system takes a lot of time to process your files. And then we are saying trim leading and trailing white space characters in the text field. So if you see here, we have white space characters and they are all trimmed. The trim leading and trailing white space characters in the fields. Right? Okay, I'll cancel this and again read the new file because I don't want to read that text. So create a new set from a file. This is my file. Everything is what as per my expectation. So I don't have to do anything. I just have to review that all data is coming fine and system is able to identify all values. Once I've done that, I would simply select next and give a name. So the name I want to give is, what is the name that we are using? WB underscore Feb 7th. This is BDS 04. This we are not importing from a custom report. We are importing from a file. And this is stock details. Right. Now my tag is this. If I want, I can add some description and yes. So this has created a new base data set for us. If I go to the data set itself, right? So what all data am I importing? I'm importing the worker name, the worker ID. Now the second thing, worker ID, the plan name, and This file basically contains that this worker, for example, Logan McNeil, she has been granted some stocks. The grant type is some PSU. She has already been granted 100 units of stocks. 300 is currently outstanding. So she was supposed to get 400. 100 she has already received. Again, I'm taking some random numbers, right? 300 is outstanding, out of which she'll get 100 on 1st of Jan 2021. She'll get the remaining 100 on 1st of Jan 2022. And the third lot, she'll get remaining 100 on 1st of Jan 2023. So these 300 units of stocks she can vest over the next 3 years, starting at January 2021. So this is the data that I'm reading. All right. Now I can go back to the data catalog, and we have created our fourth base data set. Any questions?
No.
Okay. Now, if you see, if I go back to this base data set and let's edit it once again. So this is how I have my data. So for each worker, I take that as an example. All right. So first let's complete the parse stage and then we'll talk about that. Okay. So what was the first one? Row delimiter. And what is row delimiter?
It will create a column as per the delimiters. Like in our case, it was comma.
So it will not create a column. It will create a new row, right? So column delimiter is the field delimiter. Row delimiter is how many rows of data will it have.
Yep.
Okay? So it specifies the single character that separates rows or records, whatever you want to call it, in your source data files, right? These are usually uh, line feed character, uh, carriage return character, so on and so forth, right? And then selecting any new line, which is basically what was selected by default. It causes Workday to recognize any of these representations of a new line as the row delimiter. So the moment Workday encounters any of these, Workday considers that as a row delimiter. When you select the option, any new line. Okay, then we have the field delimiter, right? Again, it specifies the single character that separates. Okay, so it specifies the single character that separates fields or columns of a row in your source data, right? So what are the most common field delimiters? Comma or tab. But you can use anything else as well, right? As we have seen in that file, there are other options as well that we could have used.
Yes.
Okay, what was the next thing that we saw? Field names.
Yep.
All right. It basically specifies that the data in first row is used for field names. When is this? when use field names from the first row checkbox is selected. Now you can always go ahead and change these field names if you want to, right? But whenever you're changing your field names, you just have to ensure that field names, if changed, cannot start with either this starting bracket or with WPA underscore, because WPA underscore are the field names which are reserved.
Yeah.
Okay. What else did we discuss? We discussed the escape character
Escape. Yeah.
and the quote character. So we have field delimiter, field name, field names. Then we have the escape character. We have the quote character. Okay, I'll just write this with example. For example, if your data contains water, beer, or honey, and soda, then this should be returned with water, honey, and soda. So here, this is the quote character, right? And if your data contains get, again, I'm taking the same example, get 2 for 1 or 9.99 each, then you'll basically say, obviously you'll include everything in your quote character. You'll say get, but then you'll add your escape character. You'll say get to. So what are you escaping? You are escaping this quote, saying that this quote is part of the data. You'll say get 2 for 1 on 99 each. Oh, so here you'll close the brackets, and here as well you'll escape it. So this over here, this and this is your escape character, and this and this are your quote characters. All right, and then we saw that we can rows to ignore, right? So it basically specifies if certain number of rows have to be ignored from the top of the file. Okay, perfect. Uh, and there was one more option. Let me just write that down as well. So do you need any short description for these as well? If you want, I'll do that.
Yeah, I mean, if you can, it would be great. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, so trim, trailing, and leading white space characters in text fields. So what is escape character? It specifies a single character that is used to escape the quote character, right? So this character, sorry, so this character, we have used this escape character so that we could escape this. And what is this? This is basically the quote character that you're using, right? So when an escape character is specified is added, Workday reads the following code character or the code character following it, code character after it as data. So now Workday knows that this is not actually a code character, this is simply data. All right. Okay. Code character is explanatory, specifies the number of lines to ignore at the beginning of the file. So that is the parse stage. A parse stage is automatically added. It cannot be deleted. So just like any other stage, we cannot go ahead and delete a parse stage. Okay, now if you see, this is my base data set I have created. Now here, this is how I have data. So each worker has 300, or let's say Logan McNeil. So I have Logan. She needs to receive 300 more grants, which is outstanding. Out of which, if you see here, we have specified 2021, wherein she'll get 100 grants, 2022, wherein she'll get 100 grants, and 2023, wherein she'll get remaining 100 grants. So if you see the same data, I have spread over 3 columns. Now this is perfectly fine, right? If this is how you want your data. But for whatever reasons, if you want to change it, you can do that. So instead of this is how I want my data. So Logan, overall, she has 300 grants, right, to be granted, out of which on 2021, she'll get 100. 2022, she'll get remaining 100. And 2023, she'll get remaining 100. And then because this is common, so if you see a single row with extra columns, I have changed it and converted into 3 rows, right? And this looks much more relevant for me. So if for whatever reasons you want to change your columns to rows, you can do that. Makes sense? So this is how I have my data, right? And I want to change this data or convert these columns into rows,
Yes.
right? Now, how can I do that? I can do that by adding something called an UnPivot stage. So right now, if you see 300 is outstanding, out of which 2021 I'll get 100, 22 I'll get 100. Now this could be perfectly fine. You'll say there is no wrong with this data, but just for the sake of example, I don't want this data in this format. I want this data in this format. And to achieve that, I'll be adding an UnPivot stage. Now again, UnPivot stage cannot be added to a base data set. So for that, obviously I'll have to create a derived data set. So let's go back to the catalog. So we have already created 2 derived data sets. Now for this file stock details, I have to create a new derived data set. So I'm going to create a derived data set, and for that I want to import the stock details that I have selected and select them. Okay, this I'm calling as DDS. We have already created 2. This is my third one. 01. I'm just calling it 01 because this is my first level derived data set. So DDS03 stock details, and I am adding it to the tag that I have created and submit. Okay, so now I can click on edit, and if I go in here, so this is where I have created a new derived data set which is importing my primary pipeline, right? Because this is a derived data set, system has automatically added the import stage. Now here I want to change the columns into rows, and for that I am going to add an unpivot stage. Okay, so let's come here. When I go here, if you see, I have the option to unpivot. So what is unpivot? Converting rows to columns.
Columns, yeah.
I can click on unpivot. Now here, what is my input fields? The first input field of mine is the vesting date. So I have vesting date over 3 separate columns. I want to bring it together. So I'm selecting my first input field as vesting date 01, which is here. Then I also want to bring my vesting date 02, which is here, and I have a third one as well. I'm also selecting vesting date 03. Okay, so these are the 3 columns. Now it will ask me, this is my input fields or my input columns, and what is the name of the output column. So here I'm calling it as just some random name, vesting dates, and here I'll call it vesting schedule. Let's go ahead and preview this now. When I preview it and go to the right, if you see now, system has added vesting dates, which is vesting date 01, 02, 03, and this is the associated vesting schedule, right? So for Logan McNeil, now instead of a single row, it is spread over 3 rows,
Yes.
right? So earlier, this was simply the title of the column. So now because we have to identify it, earlier we had 3 columns, similar to how we have here, quantity vesting 01, we had vesting date 01, wherein I had all the vesting date 01. Now I'm converted that into field value so that I can actually check, right? So it says for Logan McNeil, vesting date 01 is 1st of Jan 2020. Similarly, I also need to convert these values because as of 2021, the employee would get 100 stocks. So I would click on this plus here at the top. Now this time I want to take the quantity vesting 01, quantity vesting 02, which is basically this one, and quantity vesting 03. And I'll call it vesting quantity and vesting quantity value. Again, I can click on preview. And when I go in here, so now if you see on vesting date 01, quantity vesting 01 would be given, which is worth 100. On vesting date 02, which is 2022, I'll get another 100. On vesting date 03, I'll get another 100. Right? So this is the date that goes here, vesting dates. This is the date that goes here. This is the date that goes here. And this is the date that goes here. And I can say it done. So earlier, while I had some, let's see, 13 fields, now I have 11 fields. The reason I have 11 fields is because we added these 2 extra columns. Make sense?
Yes.
So the next stage that we have done is UnPivot stage. So UnPivot stage enables converting data from columns to rows, right? Why do you want to do it? That depends on your unique requirement, right? There's nothing wrong or right about it. You can unpivot any type of field. So if you see, we unpivoted two fields, one was date and the second was number. So this is applicable for all field types, right? So again, this was a date related field and this was actually a number related field. So it applicable for all field types. However, we can unpivot up to 150 input fields within each unpivot stage. So how many fields did we unpivot here? Let's click on edit. We unpivoted 3 input fields.
Three.
So
Yes.
this way I can unpivot up to 150 fields, right? Okay, so now I have two sets of data sets. One was the data set that I created earlier, and now this is a separate data set altogether, wherein I simply have the stocks of the employees. Now this also I have to club with the other data. So let's see what is my other data. Duplicate. Okay. Uh, all right. So let's go to the data catalog. And here we have, if you see, DDS03, which is what I created just now. And DDS01 was the initial data set that we had. So let's first look at the lineage and then we'll go to DDS01. So if I go to lineage once again, this is the lineage of my DDS01. It is here. And I have a separate data set, a separate lineage altogether, wherein I created BDS04 for stocks, for importing stock data. And for that, now I have created a new derived data set, basically because I had to add this unpivot stage. Okay,
Yes.
let's look at this derived data set. Now, how can I join data from these two data sets? What would be my common field?
You can use union.
Why? This is completely different, right? This is stock
Yeah.
grants.
And
So
this is
again,
worker
I'll do
detail.
a join. So
Okay.
now for each worker that I have here, if you see, for each worker, I can now pull the stock grants from here, right? And how would I do that? Basically worker name and worker ID. These are the two matching fields. But
Yeah.
worker
So
name
I'll use
here is
left.
text, right? So for that, field type is important. So whenever you're doing join, before this we didn't consider this because they were all created from custom reports. But let's look at that now. So worker name is a field of type text. Here worker is a field of type text. Let's see what is employee ID. Employee ID here is a field of type text, whereas here employee ID is a field of type integer. So who assigned this field type? Workday automatically assigned. So when we imported our file initially, Workday automatically saw, okay, this This column has all numbers, so it assigned the field type as integer. If we want, we can change it, but for now let me not change it. So now what I have is stock details of the employees here and all the employee details in my DDS01. So let's try and do a join now. So I'll come to add stage. I want to do a new join with this data set. So I'm copying the stock details. I want a new pipeline. Right? I'm selecting this and select. So I'll have to specify what do I want to do a join. So here we have obviously the worker name or employee name, whatever. Let's scroll down. We have worker name. So I want to join worker name with worker here. But worker can have duplicate names.
Yes.
I'm clicking on plus, and I'm also saying in my primary data sets, the worker ID, right? I could have simply done it on worker ID. I'm just doing it on both of these. Also matches with employee ID. Now, the moment I do that, system gives me an error. And the error says you cannot compare a text with an integer. So here, if you remember, worker ID or employee ID was a text. Here,
Yes.
however, it is an integer.
Integer.
So I'll have to change that. Now I can change that directly in the base data set, or I can change in the derived data set as well. So initially when system did a parsing and imported the data, I could have directly changed everything there. Or now as well, once I've imported the stock details into derived data set and done an unpivot, I can change the field type now as well. So for changing any field type data, we use a stage called manage fields. Now manage fields has other purposes as well, and I'll talk about them later. For now, let me click on add stage because this is what I'm importing. Again, as I mentioned, I could have made these changes directly in the BDS04 stock details. There itself, I could have changed the employee ID into text, and that would be perfectly fine. There's no difference. But we didn't do that there. I can do it now. Or even now, if I want to go back and make the changes there, I can do that. So I can go back to the data catalog, right? I can go back to DDS PDS04, wherein Workday had allocated the field types, and I can change it here as well, right? It doesn't matter where I change. Anywhere I want to make the changes, I would have to use manage field stage. So here I'm doing it. Let me do it here itself. I'm clicking on edit on my stock details, and that's why manage field stage is also applicable for base data sets. So now I'm coming here,
Okay.
I'm adding a manage field stage. And in this manage field stage, if you remember, I mentioned Workday automatically imports field names. Field names can be changed. If you change, you cannot add these two fields. So how can you change the field names? You can
By
change it
going to
here.
manage fields. Yeah.
Manage fields. So if you see, this is what Workday has identified. If I want, I can change the field name here. So let me
But it
cancel this
won't
and let me come.
affect the integrity of our data, like, if we have integer and we are converting it to text.
No, it won't.
Okay.
Okay. So again, you'll only do that based on your requirement. So if you see employee ID can be text as well, right? My employee ID could be E001,
Yeah.
right? So Workday does a best effort analysis and see what data is there and does just based on that, it does the mapping. So here, my only requirement is to change employee ID, which is an integer, into a text. But it doesn't make any changes to my data. It is still the same. I'll say done. And now my employee ID is a type field of type text. On my part stage, my employee ID was a field of type integer. Okay, I can view the data set from there. I can go back to the derived data set. So now if I go back to the data catalog, and now let's go to the derived data set and see what is happening with our derived data set. Edit. Will I have to I'll have to re-import this data, but then that shouldn't happen because we have already made the changes. Mm, okay, again selecting the same one. Select. Mm -mm, mm -mm, mm. It is not automatically, though it should. Let's view the data set once again. Okay, it is not automatically recognizing the changes any which ways. Let me add the manage field stage here as well because it is not recognizing the changes, though it should. I'm selecting text here for the same thing. It should actually. Okay, now if I come here, I would cancel, go back. I want to add a new join with another pipeline. It is DDS03 stock details. I want to say employee ID is same as employee ID and employee name is same as employee name. So worker name here matches to worker here and add a new row and say employee ID matches to employee ID here. This, oh, is it not saved yet? Okay, let's do this from, oh, it's not saved, shit. Okay, it's not saved, I forgot saving. Okay, actually there shouldn't be a need to add a manage field stage. I'm not sure why it is. Okay, this has to be changed to text. I forgot saving it. I'll say done. And I am saving my changes this time. Now I'll add a new join stage. I want to join it with DDS03, select, and I want to say worker name maps to worker here and employee ID maps to employee ID here. This time it doesn't give me any error because they are both mapping. I want to select all columns from here. and from second I want to select all columns except for worker name and employee ID and save done. So I've added a new join stage, which is basically identifying the stocks granted to the employees. And I'll go ahead and save this. Okay. All right. So let's stop here.